The practice of music has lost its key functions and roles in society. This is not a uniquely Australian phenomenon. It's worldwide, nor is it confined to music practiced on the fringes of society. It's a problem common to all music forms, both popular and unpopular. Actually, I'm not the person for this job, as the music that interests me is not the music that the majority of citizens care to listen to, play, or enjoy. I wrote a public address on this subject back in 2007, of which this book is the extended rave, because no one else was talking about this issue, so I thought I should. Now, when the Lord Mayor of Sydney this year authorised an official task force into the decline of live music, suddenly the cultural elite woke up to how horribly wrong it's all gone. Thousands packed the State Theatre. You might have thought they were going to a public concert. No, they were going to hear the task force talk about why there was no live music, or little live music left in Sydney. Mostly when the performance of live music is mentioned in the traditional media or online, you would be forgiven for thinking that music is getting played all over Australia and musicians are having a great time doing it and they're getting handsomely paid for it. If you read anything in the press, these days it's mostly promotional bullshit, in the guise of music criticism, of course. We, as practitioners, have to keep the illusion of success and credibility in front of the public's gaze. If you go to the Australia Council's website, for example, you will read that for 2011, Australians purchased almost 100 million sound recordings. Audience demand for major music performances reached over 10 million tickets, generating sales of 1.4 billion. That's including all the costs of the related taxi rides, overpaid officious bouncers, and overpriced drinks, of course. The notion of a live music industry these days is surely a contradiction in terms, if not an out-and-out insult, as I'm about to reveal. The Australia Council says of these figures, Australians are consuming music faster than ever. Think about that. I don't know how you can actually consume music faster than actually hearing it in real time, unless everything is sped up and you go, or something like this. It's a sonic feeding frenzy out there. In 2009, Australian households spent an estimated $2 billion on music-related services. That's more than they spent, apparently, on internet charges, domestic holiday airfares, and trips to the dentist. 57% of Australians attend live music events each year, making music the biggest art form in Australia. They don't mention, of course, if that's one concert a year they go to or 7 concerts a week. It's all the same to statisticians, apparently. But now we come to consider the insulting term live music industry. On another page, already lost within the maze of statistics, is the reality of this music consumption. The median income, that's half above, half below, for professional musicians in Australia stands at $7,200 a year. Not 70,000, $7,200 a year. This figure includes minor celebrities, second division pop stars, famous have-beens, would-have-beens, music managers, academics, and bureaucrats on very comfortable salaries. Of the 60,000 musicians registered with APRA, only 12,500 musicians are thought to be doing anything approaching the status of a professional praxis in music in this country. It's clear, although I have no statistics to prove it, the overwhelming majority must be living on that traditional form of government subsidy, namely the dole. The profession of music is just about over. The practice of live music outside of heavily subsidised classical music, fashionable DJing, or stadium rock has become casualised. The sound of music is ubiquitous, the constant earbud film score accompanying our busy lives, but no one is actually playing it. As time is short, I'll mention just a few of the specific gripes dealt with in this book. And there's plenty more on its pages. So gripe number 1, the internet. Internet 2.0, to be precise. Drip feeds us with an inexhaustible supply of music, most of which can be had for free. Even an obscure artist like myself, I can find a dozen websites where my material can be downloaded for free or for a few dollars. I don't have the time or the resources to go chasing after these people. It's how it is. We accept, we adapt, or we get a real day job. The creators of Muzak in the 1950s, invented for the American military, like most things, would be nonplussed by the sheer force and magnitude of the current digital deluge. Many commentators have already pointed out that data is not information, information is not knowledge, knowledge is not wisdom, but I would add to that, the digital era doesn't save us time. It takes time. It takes eons of our time. And that's from someone like me who's been involved with interactive technologies since the mid-1980s. Yes, I hear you say that, what about crowdsourcing, the ease of access, of everything you always wanted to know but were afraid to ask? Distant shrinking capabilities, the sharing of ideas via the Creative Commons, self-publishing, Wikipedia, etc. Some of this might be intellectually useful, entertaining even, a genuine freedom of information, but I don't see any of these 21st century consumerist glories creating more properly paid work for live music. People won't pay the adult cost of what it takes to put a good musician on stage and play music in front of the public. The inherent contradiction of music and late capitalism is that live music lives out a transitory experience, that when it's finished, nothing is left to sell or speculate on, except maybe the t-shirt. I'm used to playing to small audience numbers around the world because I play unpopular music. Early in my career, I played popular music in order to subsidize my desire for experimentation in the world of improvisation, for which I assumed I would never make a living. It turned out differently than expected, and I've survived 40 years in what used to be known as the avant-garde. Then it was known as postmodernism, and now I haven't got a clue what it called, except I just call it unpopular music. And we can go on how I survived later if anybody's really interested. But basically, you have to work extremely hard in diverse, if not sometimes perverse situations in many countries to get by. I'm happy to play for small audiences, is what you would expect from being outside the mainstream. But, ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing more depressing than seeing a rock band with a sizable PA thrashing away at what should be popular music in front of half a dozen depressed young souls, huddled in the corner of a darkened pub room with a sticky carpet. That's if you can find a pub with live music or even a sticky carpet. So it's not just the internet which is destroying live music. Gripe 2, real estate. The house or apartment buyers who want to live in the inner city are also part of the problem. The desire to live where the creatives live when they are young and groovy is understandable, and then complain like hell when you bought into the mortgage and the baby and all you want to do is sleep and not listen to live music thumping in an adjacent building all through the night. The famous Sydney rock venue, the Annandale Hotel, was closed down by 3 complaining residents in their sparkling new apartments opposite. The previous council supported the closure, and even though the noise of the Parramatta Road in peak hour is louder than any noise of bands being heard from the inside, it went through. The new, young, enthusiastic mayor of inner city Leichhardt wants to turn the Parramatta Road into a cultural hub. He's got to be joking or dreaming I assume some of you have had the pleasure of trying to drive through this suffocating, stinking hell of a blocked artery known as the Parramatta Road. After $100,000 of legal fees, I believe the pub is going to continue as some sort of restrained, safe, legal, clean, excitement-killing music venue. Probably with more shaved head bouncer types at the door to keep the kids under control. Real estate can be a criminal enterprise in places like Sydney, but we pay the crims what we want, and they give it to us. The city is made in our compliant, consuming image, which moves us on nicely to gripe 3, law. As a lawyer recently pointed out to me, there is never less law. There is only more law. We just keep piling additional irritations on top of our towering stack of regulations. In the last century, I played in a variety of musics in every conceivable venue, and indeed often outside and beyond venues. This would have included RSL clubs, sports clubs, art galleries, university unions, cafes, radio stations, restaurants, nightclubs, beaches, supermarkets, trade unions, clubs, jazz clubs, and even a drunken divorce party on an expensive boat in Sydney Harbour. And through all these gigs, I was never once asked if I had public liability, although I was questioned on occasion if what I did was actually music. In this century, the issue of public liability has risen from a murmur to a loud corporate roar. That roar is hollow, of course. It's based on convincing a poor and disenfranchised part of the community, namely the performing artists, that somehow there has always been public liability, it's for our own good, and we should stop complaining and pay up. For those who are not performers, I should explain. Most venues are required to have some kind of insurance against the building burning or falling down, which I guess is reasonable to a degree. But this public liability is another scam altogether. It demands that each individual artist carry PLI by law. So in the case that someone in the audience trips over their shoelace and lands on their head, and the idiot decides to sue the musician because the music was too out of tune, too loud, too modern, too interesting, too complicated, too minimal, too much, and thus caused the accident, the responsible musician will be covered if this piece of insanity ever makes it to court. Of course, it's not likely to, but this doesn't stop the insurance industry and the politicians who help create this cultural choking nonsense from ripping off every performer in the country. The minimum premium is $2,000. That figure is basic cover, and it even includes cover for that excessively violent, accident-inducing radical group known as singing teachers. If you do anything considered more publicly dangerous than strum a guitar on stage, the premium can go way above $10,000 a year. Please remember, our median musician annual income is just above $7,000 a year. Over the years, I've worked in over 30 countries, and I've never come across such a double-dipping insurance scam as we have here in Australia. Not even in litigation and paranoid central, i.e. the USA, have I been asked to show my PLI papers. Don't we have Medicare for those who become accident-prone while listening to music? We have allowed ourselves to slip into the hands of legislators and insurance weasels. How did this come about? Well, I guess those in power saw an opportunity post 9/11 to create that always potent cocktail of generating more public fear and thus generating more private income for the heads of industry. And insurance is a hell of a top-heavy industry. I picture the scene one pleasant morning on the golf course. Insurance executives are out there enjoying themselves. How can we come up with increasing the size of our insurance market, they're asking themselves? Can we find a vulnerable, poor, hopeless, useless, pointless, voiceless part of the community that won't complain, who we can screw big time? Yes, musicians. Nah, mate, let's make it all performers. Anyone who does anything on stage in front of an audience, we can get the lot of them. And so, ladies and gentlemen, they did. Which leads on to gripe 4, busking. The buskers of Sydney must wade through a 13-page policy document, 18 pages of busking guidelines, 14 pages of site maps and an application form. They must pay a $45 fee, buy the aforementioned public liability at $2,000 a pop, be vetted, photographed, fingerprinted. Nah, not yet. Soon. Display their accreditation cards, not sell other people's CDs, and this is all before the impoverished musician is allowed to play one note of music. As the Sydney City Council's Cultural Development Officer puts it in classic Kafkaesque speak, unless you have written rules, it's difficult to ask people to comply with them. Yes, indeed, and we were all once larrikins. Gripe 5, the bloody architects. I've just put that adjective in right there. If you were to ask the Australian Institute of Architects as to the state of live music in this country, you would probably hear plenty of positive-sounding mumbles and murmurs. Money sloshing around this way and that over the last decade or so as projects as the completion of the Sydney Opera House at $700 million, the refurbishment of the studio of the Sydney Opera House at $14 million, the Recital Hall Melbourne, $128 million, the new look Hamer Hall at $136 million, the new Sydney Conservatorium of Music at $144 million, Princess Wharf No. 1 upgrade in Hobart at $15 million. Well, that's enough buildings. Let's throw in Opera Australia's Raft with its crystal-studded chandelier. That's only $11 million. I think of that as the Medusa Raft project, but that's just wishful thinking. If we add all these up on the back of an envelope, we get a cool $1.148 billion spent on buildings for live music. None of this, of course, actually goes to employing musicians to play music. We don't have enough buildings. I mean, we know for sure that over 10% of all office space in places like Melbourne and Sydney is empty. So 1 floor in 10 could be a venue for starters. There are many more ideas about this kind of thing in this. So if the prefects of classical music are saying not only that music belongs in the sanctuary of a museum, but that music itself is a museum, the discourse becomes unsustainable. With the exceptions of stadium rock, festivals, and opera, most live music requires little infrastructure, certainly nothing in the ballpark of these huge sums of money. Before 1788, of course, all music performance happened outside. How many open-air concerts of new music could we get for $1.148 billion? Paying each musician $500 a concert, at an average of 10 musicians a concert, that would be 2,002,906 concerts. At 10,000 concerts a year, that might take us way beyond the human race's use-by date. The final gripe for today, aesthetics and priorities. This refers mainly to government notions of culture. Opera Australia in 2009 received more funding from the Australia Council than all applicants for all 6 of all of Australia Council's major art boards combined. Another set of figures puts total federal funding of music at $84.7 million, of which $72.4 million goes straight to the opera company and some orchestras. That leaves $5.7 million, which is fought over by the rest. That's all other, the rest being all other music of any kind of genre going on in any place in Australia. And it's administered competitively, unlike the other stuff, through the Music Board. According to the Music Board, that is set in stone for the next 10 years short of a revolution. Even if you add to this basic regime the funding of various states, the balance doesn't change. It remains seriously warped in favour of 19th century high art forms, inexpensive big buildings. Some sort of imbalance there, maybe, just a little one. It reminds us that aesthetic preferences of the ruling classes of the late 19th century are still largely the dominant code of cultural power elite in the 21st. Somehow the 20th century's gone missing. Somewhere it's disappeared. Why should the ruling culture of the late 19th century hold such sway in the 21st century? If we're going to do historical spectacle, why stop at the 19th century? Why not do the 1st century? Wheel in a few gladiators, lions, Christians, and restore the Colosseums around the world to their traditional functionality. If music is promoted and experienced as heritage instead of a volatile, ever-changing, contemporaneous medium, it will always be on the back foot, defending its position and preserving its status and privilege. Music must be renewed and transformed every day to remain sustainable as art. And the statistics I've been using for this little talk come from that wonderful team, Ernst & Young. It's like a sort of a cheer squad for any corporation that will pay them. So the situation is probably worse than what I've outlined. Thank you very much.